Hello guys, so today I'm going to be doing my first Kaiju Universe tier list video, and hopefully I'll have many more to come here. So to start off, I only have 4 tiers here because I excluded the D tier because really there is no terrible Kaiju in the game. Every single Kaiju is viable. So I don't want to bore you guys too much here, so let's get started with this tier list. So coming in with the worst Kaiju in the game, I'm going to have to go with Gazora here. Despite Gazora getting overbuffed, yeah, it is a menace in the water, but if your whole gimmick is that you stay in the water when most fights happen in the air and on land, you're not really going to be seeing too much action here. So Gazora, I mean, it is a lot better on land than it used to be, so I'd give it that, but still remains as the worst Kaiju in the game. Coming in at the second worst, well, I really have Kamada-kun here. Well, Kamada-kun known for being a glass cannon here, having high DPS. Not too much base HP, I think around maybe 2200, 2250, something like that. Really just underperforming. It's basically, I mean, it has a water buff in the water, so that makes it a lot better than it should be. And it has a really high DPS on land, being able to compete with things like Kamacuras in terms of DPS, but because it's slow and kind of just crippled here, it can't really do much, so that grants Kamada-kun its spot in C tier. Next up here, we have its brother, Shin Form 3 here. Now, back in the day, if you guys did not know, I think this came a bit recently here, but Shin Form 3 used to have a 2-second beam cooldown where it could just beam spam, so people would just sit in the water and just beam spam with it. But its DPS definitely not something to be passed over here. But just Shin Form 3 just really underperforms basically in every category. Health, not too good. Speed, it's all right. It's like your average running speed. Its melees aren't anything special, and its beam I think does like maybe 800 damage. So it's not really their best choice coming in with Kaiju Universe here. So moving on here, this will be our first example of when it comes to kaijus that have multiple forms here. For example, like something like Cleric or Fire Rodan. I'm not going to be taking their base form. I'll just assume that it's their special form. So Fire Rodan is going to be placed here in C tier. Fire Rodan, it used to be really overpowered, but its extended hurt box really just cripples it. Kind of like Showa Mechagodzilla, except Showa Mechagodzilla doesn't have that crippled effect on land like Showa Rodan. I mean, sorry, Heisei Rodan here, and Heisei Rodan. I mean, it has a nice beam, but when it comes to air combat, you're basically gonna be losing to almost everything except Showa Mechagodzilla because of your extended hurt box. Really, I mean, it is the second fastest flying kaiju, but you can't really do much with that when your melees are kind of underperforming here and you have an extended hurt box. So now, hey, Fire Rodan is going to be placed at the top of C tier. Moving into B tier here, we're going to be having our favorite kaiju. Where is it? Showa Manila. If I can find it here. There we go. Showa Manila. Now, a lot of people think Showa Manila is one of the worst kaijus in the game. It's not that it's really bad. It's just that compared to other kaijus, it's not the best in the world. Its DPS is pretty solid. You can use your tantrum before going into an attack, but if you're fighting someone without tantrum and you try to use it in between the fight, that's basically a death sentence here. The ring attack, easily the most useless attack in the game. Your beam with tantrum enabled does a solid, I think maybe 1500 damage, 1100, something like that. And your melee DPS isn't bad at all, not to mention its base HP being 3450. Solid kaiju, but just underperforming compared to everything else. Moving on here, we have Showa Kumanga, who used to be an A tier, but now a B tier kaiju because of its nerf. Showa Kumanga used to have really nice active frames on all of its attacks, making for a high DPS kaiju with a very solid beam and good HP, but now because of the nerf, it kind of crippled Kumanga here. Hopefully Kumanga can see some love within the next rebalance update, but Kumanga just underperforming. Its beam does grant slowness, but doesn't really do much for Kumanga. It's kind of just going to have to range people with its web, but then again, if another kaiju has a beam, it can't really do much. Its melees, nothing too special there. The damage is alright, but the active frames just got completely gutted with the update. So sliding in here at the next spot, we do have Kamibis. Kamibis, one of definitely a very clunky kaiju to use here, but do not mistake it. It's with its V move, you can get your water buff on land, so it is a very high damage dealer on land, but its DPS isn't exactly the best in the world. It can perform very well in water here, I mean, as it is a turtle, and it gets that damage buff of 2 times in the water, which is very nice. Well, 1.5 times, sorry. And I mean, Kamibis does have that heal, but it does leave you stationary whenever it is over. So Kamibis, you know, just a overall meh kaiju, not exactly the best choice to take. Coming in front of Kamibis here, we do have Final Wars Goji. Now, well, if I kind of move it here, over here. Come on, there we go. Final Wars Goji here. I think it might need a slight buff here. I don't want it to get overbuffed as it is 11.2k G-Cell Kaiju here. But the problem with Final Wars Goji is that its beam is very nice. Both beams are nice, but they do set each other on cooldown. The damage difference between Spiral Ray and your blue beam is not too different. I think it's like maybe 200 or 300 damage, so you're really most of the time just better off using the Spiral Ray. Its melee DPS is insanely high with its combo, but that's even if you can get the combo to that high extent, as the range on Final Wars' melees is very bad. I think Gojira can even outrange it. So Final Wars Goji really just not your best pick here. And then moving on here, we're going to go with, where is it? Sorry if it might take a bit too long finding kaijus. Here we go. Singular Point Anguirus. Now, Singular Point Anguirus used to be really useless before its buff. Its DPS was very poor. It did have extendos on its melees, but it still was a very bad kaiju. Its V move was almost useless as it took years to activate. But now with this buff, Single Point Anguirus did get a DPS increase as its animations are, I think, 2 times faster, something like that. And SPAng is a very solid kaiju. Its V move is actually usable now. You can use it to block beams, and it's just pretty good, but just not good enough to move it higher in the tier list. Coming in after SPAng, its twin brother here, Showa Anguirus. Now, you'd think SPAng with its buff would be better than Showa Anguirus, but no. Showa Anguirus is a tank, 3,300 base HP. I think it has like 30 sprinting speed at base. Its DPS is very solid with a lot of active frames on each melee, making Showa Anguirus a very well-rounded kaiju and a very solid choice to pick. Coming in after it, its brethren as a starter, Gojira. If I can just move it over here, there we go. Gojira, not to be slept on at all. Gojira 54 has a very nice beam with 1650. And not to mention Incandescent Light. Its 5th move doing, I think, 1,000 damage in a very short amount of time for a close-range beam. Gojira's DPS is not to be slept on either. Higher than Showa Anguirus' by quite the bit, but Gojira with, I think, 2,800 base HP, just what you would call a glass cannon, but its beam is very useful. Gojira is just a very nice kaiju to play as. Coming in after it, surprisingly, we have here Mothra Larva. Mothra Larva, it is very fast on land. You can range people with your third attack. The third attack is the one that spins Mothra Larva, dealing, I think, 400 damage. Although fights may take long while doing this, you can get hit like very rarely while using this attack. Its silk web beam is not a bad option either, doing roughly 800 damage. You can range your opponents and punish them if they beam with Mothra Larva's high DPS, because if they do beam and you're right under them, just spam 1, you'll do a lot of damage there. So Mothra Larva, pretty good kaiju. Next up here we have, where is it? Trying to find it here. There we go. Mother Longlegs. Mother Longlegs, although it did get like basically verfed into the ground, Mother Longlegs used to be insanely OP, even being high S tier. The only thing I could compete with is Monster Zero and Destroya. Mother Longlegs does float above the ground, so shorter kaijus such as Mothra Larva, Gazora, Kamada-kun can't exactly hit it. So, I mean, Mother Longlegs, it is slowed when doing that third attack, but it does have a nice AoE. Its melee DPS isn't bad at all and has a solid HP of around 2,600 at base, but making Mother Longlegs deserve its spot here in a roughly mid B tier. Next up here we have Godzilla Jr. Basically, Godzilla Jr. is just Gojira 54 but better. It has more HP, it is faster with its third attack being basically a lunge. Its DPS is not too shabby, and its beam does grant you to be able to use it at close range, considering you can do 2 melees with that animation before that beam fires off, making the attack total to roughly 1,200. it is a very solid kaiju, and I'd say it deserves its spot here in B tier. Next up, surprisingly, fortunate for this kaiju, but Biolante coming in here at mid B tier. Biolante, let's get started on this. Biolante used to be low S tier, insanely good, but it just got nerfed to the ground. There was a thing with Biolante that you could do with its jump that, well, I don't know. I never found out how to do this personally, but it was something to do with control lock where it was basically giving Biolante an extra dash on top of its fourth ability, which is a dash in of itself. Biolante with its high HP, with that pairing that with the dash and the jump made it an S tier kaiju, but its DPS did get nerfed heavily, and you can no longer jump. Basically, so Biolante is a very slow kaiju. That dash does help it a lot, but you're really never going to be able to beat the average kaiju as it did get nerfed severely. Its beam is not very powerful, but its health is really just its main factor. But unfortunately for Biolante, it's going to sit here at B tier. Coming up next here, we have the two crawlers. Put those in because they're rough. They're very similar here. One is slightly better than the other, the Wendigo crawler, having a bit more range with the tail swipe because that's the ability you can spam. Because the crawlers do have abilities that you can spam. For example, Skull Crawler has the third attack that you can lunge forward, and Wendigo crawler has that tail whip. Both of these kaijus, to have their insane DPS, will require you to spam an ability, but that's what makes them so good. Their DPS is really high, but their HP is kind of on the downside here, roughly 3,000 base HP. They are relatively fast kaiju, Wendigo having that extra charge regen, just making it slightly better than Skullcrawler here. Grants it this spot in B. Next up, we have Jet Jaguar. Jet Jaguar, even with the buff, isn't exactly their best kaiju in the world here. The Whirlwind does grant it 75% damage reduction to all beams, if I'm correct here. It does, so you can block beams and then punish with your own, but it is slowed down in that beam, so you can be punished if you don't have enough room. Its melee DPS isn't too bad, having the hand chop with the drop kick. It does grant JJ its spot here in B tier. Its health is not too great, 2800, but it is one of the fastest land kaiju, so it's a very well-rounded kaiju here. Coming in here near the top of B tier, we have Kong 2017. Now, Kong 2017 has very high DPS, coming in at the highest of all, highest base HP, well, and total HP of all the Skull Island kaijus at 3850, 3,850. Kong 2017 is not to be messed with. If you get close to it, you will take a lot of damage from Kong 2017. Very well-rounded kaiju here. So, now moving on here, we're going to have Showa Mechagodzilla at the top of B tier. Showa Mechagodzilla with that buff did give it a lot more HP and actually did make it a better kaiju. Before, it used to completely shit on every single land kaiju, but with this buff, it actually does make it viable on land here. Now that it has 26 base sprinting, well, walking speed. Showa Mechagodzilla does not have the hurt box, well, the extended hurt box on land, making it actually be able to contend on land with other kaijus. And the missiles act as a melee as well as normal melee being faster, so Showa Mechagodzilla does have, well, I wouldn't say great DPS, but better DPS than it did before. And its beam is actually pretty usable in the air now, being roughly 1,000 damage over a extended period of time. And all attack is not a bad attack at all, so it grants Showa Mechagodzilla its spot at top of B tier. Now, entering bottom of A tier, we're going to have Male Muto. Now, Male Muto, on launch, was quite a bad kaiju. It could never use its hitboxes to range kaijus, but now with that buff, it does have almost full body melees here. Male Muto is a very good kaiju. It has a lot of mobility attacks. For example, in the air, the third attack does grant it a speed buff, and the fourth attack is basically you just clap, then it'll shoot you backwards, and then it'll rush forwards. It's a full body melee, but it will tell opponents that you're coming at them, so they could just like run into you on purpose and hit you. But still, Male Muto does have a lot of mobility there. Not to mention its moveset on land is vastly different here. The fourth attack becomes an AoE, and the second attack pushes you backwards, being able to range kaijus that are slower than you on land. Male Muto definitely a very good kaiju, and granted its spot at bottom of A tier. Coming up next, we have Megalon. Megalon, the highest ranking quote-unquote starter here. It's not S tier Godzilla guy. Anyways, Megalon, very solid kaiju with those extendos, very nice active frames, great to get a very solid DPS. It has base HP of 3,300. Its beam on the lower side, doing 79 max damage per tick, roughly 800 damage. Its dig solid for avoiding beams. Sorry, and I mean it does take a while to get into the animation, but once you do, you're basically it does grant you iframes and you do damage. But once you pop up, it does grant you vulnerable. But those extendos really help Megalon being a starter and very easy to use for your average player. And granted, it's spotted in low A tier. Coming up next, Mogera. Now, Mogera, still a very solid kaiju. Its beam, very quick, doing high DPS. 3 ticks of 450, doing like 1,300 damage. Mogera, not basically a shell of its former self. Used to be able to compete with Dest, but it does beat almost every land kaiju, but it's kind of on the lower HP side, 3,800 base. Mogera, not exactly the fastest flyer, but those missiles and that beam really grant it the ability to compete with every single land kaiju and win most of its encounters. Mogera, very solid kaiju here. Moving up next, talk about a shell of its former self, Frozen Behemoth. Now, Frozen Behemoth got nerfed. Well, not really nerfed, just fixed because of how bugged it was. Its freeze chance on every attack was 100%, and it's, don't get me started about its heal in the Frozen Garden. Frozen Behemoth here, not exactly the best kaiju in the game, but still at low A tier. Its DPS not the best in the world. You really just have to hope that the RNG blesses you by granting your opponent with the freeze status effect, because usually freeze will do roughly 40% of the damage you deal in the fight. It's not the worst kaiju in the world, but definitely a shell of its former self here. Usually you're better off using an HP build here with Frozen Behemoth instead of regen, as your regen only affects the heal in the Frozen Garden by like 1, so the base is roughly 10 inside. While if you sit in the 4th ability, the 5th ability of Frozen Behemoth, probably one of the most useless attacks in the game. Takes a very long time to start up, but it does grant a lot of slowness, but still really not worth using. Sorry. Anyways, coming up with our next addition here in A tier, Kamidolf. Kamidolf, very nice kaiju. Its beam is very solid. We're doing roughly 1,300. It does have very low HP, 2,300 base, but its pulse is very nice, doing freeze and slowness. All you have to do is hit 1 tick. Its melee, not the best in the world, 420 damage, but it is very fast and can be used to range some land kaijus. But since you're very fragile, it does leave you to having to be very precise with what you do and very careful how you play as it. Kamidolf, really well-rounded, but not exactly the best kaiju in the world here. Coming in after Kamidolf, we're going to have Showa Gigan. Showa Gigan used to be extremely overpowered, as you could use those land attacks in the air. But Showa Gigan, still a very solid kaiju. Its beam, very quick, 3 seconds for 1,200 damage. Its portal V ability, basically just do that whenever someone beams you. You'll take almost no damage from it. Its melees aren't the best in the world. You can punish people with that first attack, just meleeing them in between some of their melees. Showa Gigan, 3,300 base HP, not too great, but it is very fast and very nimble, and you can punish people if you're good with it. Showa Gigan, very, very nice. Oh, and sorry, that actually retracts my statement from earlier of Megalon being the highest ranked starter. Showa Gigan does take that spot with the highest ranked starter in KU. Next up here, we're going to be having Titanus Scylla. Scylla, no one really liked playing as it with its rework when it was on launch, but Scylla with its buff, it's a very nice kaiju. You can do very well with it if you have a higher skill while using it. It can range people with its heavy 4, which is the water spit. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know what it's called. It has very nice range, but its DPS is abysmal. So if someone gets in your face, you're not faster than them, kind of GG's for you. But still a very, very nice kaiju, and high skill will reward you with it. Next up here, the complete opposite of low DPS, Kamacuras. Kamacuras is a very nice kaiju. It can fly, but can only use 1 melee while flying. Kamacuras' DPS is extremely high compared to other kaijus, but you have to be very careful with that. I think it has roughly 3,000 base HP. Kamacuras is very nice. It's a very fast kaiju, and you're better off using it on land. Its melees are very quick, so you can punish people if they beam. Not to mention you can jump over people's melees. Kamacuras, a very solid kaiju, and deserves a spot here in roughly low A tier. Coming up next, Similar to Chemicurse's high DPS here, we do have female Mudo. Female Mudo used to have insane HP regen and charge regen. Femudo does have a nice 4,500 base HP with insane active frames on its melees. You can use your second attack and then your third attack, and even when the second attack's over, those frames will still exist. So you can do roughly like 2 or 3 attacks in the span of like a couple seconds here, doing like 1,500. Femudo, very nice kaiju. Its HP regen is not exactly the best in the world anymore, as it used to have 170, 180 max HP regen. Very solid kaiju and a very good pick if I were playing KU. Next up here, we're gonna have Mega Gearus. Now, after Mega Gearus's rebalance, Mega Gearus did see an HP buff, but became slower, and its Fireball was nerfed a bit because its duration isn't as long, so you won't be able to have as much range with the Fireball. But it's still very nice, roughly 800 damage. At full controllability, one of the best projectiles in the game, if not the best. Mega Gearus, now that it has more HP, and its melee's got a buff here, usually you're better off just using the second melee, because the first and the third melees were quite bad. But now that those can see the light of day and actually be a very nice melee, Mega Gearus, a very solid kaiju with all 3 melees being effective, its Fireball being a nice move, and Mega Gearus still being the fastest flyer in the game, just by a tad bit. Coming up next here, we have the first Monsterverse Godzilla, I believe, G14. G14, unfortunately for G14, the lowest ranked Monsterverse Godzilla. But G14, make no mistake, its DPS is very high with the Claw, Tail Whip, and the Stomp. Its beam, not exactly too great, as it does have a very long startup, but 1,850 damage. G14, very nice with that 4,300 base HP as well. Sorry if I get some stats wrong. I'm kind of just going off on the top of my head here. I think G14 either has 4,300 or 4,400 base HP. Feel free to correct me in the comments, or if you have any different opinions. But G14, very well-rounded kaiju, high DPS, meh beam, and solid HP. It is on the slower end here, coming in with roughly 24 base sprint speed, but still very good and a very solid choice. Coming up next in front of G14, we're going to have the first Ghidorah. If I can find it, there we go. Showa King Ghidorah. Showa King Ghidorah is basically the definition of Sky Camp. It's Thundering Typhoon, 3 ticks of 200, 600 in total. 3 ticks of 200 and 600 damage in total. You can basically Sky Camp any land kaiju with this ability. Showa King Ghidorah is very nice. Its beam is nice on land, but if you beam clash, you're going to be doing like 17 per tick and losing beam clash to anything. Showa King Ghidorah, its melees on land aren't bad. Its second attack is a nice AoE, and it has solid HP, being in the 3,000 range. You can't exactly, I don't remember the exact number, but Showa King Ghidorah, very nice base HP and max HP as well. I think it's in mid 4,000s for max HP. It is decently fast, and you can basically win most of your fights against most land kaijus with Showa King Ghidorah, but it isn't exactly the best in air, which gives it its rank at roughly mid A tier. Coming up next, we have everyone's favorite Gigan. I don't know if that's the case here, but I actually really like Zombie Gigan. Zombie Gigan deserves its spot here. Its melee DPS, not exactly too great here, but its base HP with 25, 2,600. Not exactly the highest in the world, but that Living Dead ability, it has, if you get 3 out of 3, that will give you basically an extra 1,500, because every time you do reach 0 HP, you will get 500. Sorry, had to pause for a second, had something in my throat. But yeah, Zombie Gigan does have very nice extendos on that first melee with 600 damage respectively and 570 for the second one. You have to use the second one a lot closer. Its beam does give itself HP regen, and Zombie Gigan is a very nice kaiju to use here. It does grant it at mid A tier. Coming up next, our first Jaeger in Kaiju Universe, Cherno Alpha. Cherno Alpha is a very nice kaiju, well-rounded, 4,900 base HP, melee DPS, not the best in the world, but is very respectable. Its flamethrower, definitely a very good ability. It gives fire 1 for 7 seconds if contact with the enemy. Flamethrower will roughly do usually 1,000 to 1,200 damage every use. You can use it up to 4 times depending on how many of the orange circles you have in its little panel to the right of your screen whenever you're playing as Cherno. Very tanky, probably the tankiest of the Jaegers, I'd assume, as it is the heaviest of the Jaegers in the Pacific Rim lore. It has the parry. The parry, you used to over rely on its parry at launch, but since they did buff its second attack to now do, well, fixed it to do 2 ticks, and it has nice extendos, and its first and third melees got buffs, showing off a very nice kaiju. Missing out on the 6,000 max HP mark, but it has a 5,800 max, no, 5,900, sorry. Showing off with just really well-rounded kaiju here, granting it at mid A. Coming in next, Ready Player One Mechagodzilla. Now, if some people are confused on why I'm ranking it here, as it does have low HP but very high damage, but the reason I have it here and not higher or lower is because it can't really do anything to flying kaijus. Its missiles are somewhat effective. They might do maybe 800 to 1,000 damage if you land every single melee in overcharge. But that 2,800 HP does cripple it. It's very fast, but it does high damage, but it can't exactly do anything to flying kaijus. When you're fighting another land kaiju as RPO, however, you can range them with missiles and flamethrowers. Your flamethrower is a very nice attack and has more range than it seems like it does. It's basically the overcharge ability is a constant like damage booster. Here you can use it after every single melee. RPO, very well-rounded kaiju and deserves its spot here. Coming up next, we have Frostbite Godzilla. Talk about range here. Frostbite Godzilla's whole playstyle is just ranging. With that one quiet moment, you want to start. Well, if you're in a fight, you might want to start that off with either the beam or one quiet moment here. So one quiet moment will present that wall, but some kaijus who do have a charge can charge through that. One quiet moment will basically present itself as a wall of slowness for any kaiju that dares step into it. So it will basically put them on Frostbite Godzilla's level since it does have a slow sprinting speed of 21. Frostbite Godzilla's melees are very punishable but do high damage, but its melee DPS is very poor, heavily relying on its quote-unquote Falcon Punch and its beam, now that it's beam fixed. Thank God. Frostbite Godzilla is a very nice kaiju, granting itself at mid-A tier. Coming up next here, we have our, I think, highest ranking Showa kaiju? Yeah, highest ranking Showa kaiju. Showa Godzilla. Now, Showa Godzilla, not to be slept on. While flying, can only use one melee, but that punch does have very nice active frames, doing roughly 480 damage in the air. Showa Godzilla, very effective on land. That 3,300 base HP does give it more HP than most small kaijus compared to it. Its melees on the ground are not bad at all. Dorsal plate charge doing roughly 700 damage if you can land it. It's a really nice combo of doing the punch, drop kick punch, and then dorsal plate charge. Not to mention his beam is very nice, doing roughly 1,500 to 1,700 damage. I can't exactly remember, but that does make Showa Godzilla a very well-rounded kaiju, deserving its spot here. Coming up next, Heisei King Ghidorah. Heisei King Ghidorah, the thing about this, opposite to our Ready Player One, is that it completely destroys any land kaiju. The reason behind this is that, for one, it can melee while beaming, so even if they want to beam back, or if they don't beam back and just decide to try and punish you with their melees, you can melee and beam, resulting in a very nice combo there. 4,500 base HP, very solid for Heisei King Ghidorah. Its melees are very quick, but have a small hitbox, but that doesn't matter when you're fighting something slower than you, such as a land kaiju. But the problem with Heisei King Ghidorah is that it is a very big kaiju, standing at 140 meters tall. And then if you're fighting another flying kaiju, your hurtbox, is very large here, granting yourself to be hit pretty easily by opposing flying kaijus. Heisei King Ghidorah, very nice and overall well-rounded kaiju. Coming up next here, Titanus Mosura, Fall from Grace, used to be up there, maybe top 5 kaiju in the game, but with its nerf, its web now has a increased cooldown and a lower lifespan of the web, meaning that it'll have less range. It did get a hurtbox increase, so it's a lot easier to hit. Saving Grace did get a nerf, so it doesn't heal as much, and it's not as spammable. The blind is very effective when it lands, but it's very easy to avoid as it does slow Titanus Mosura down. Its melees don't exactly have the best hitbox in the world. You kind of have to punish your enemy. But if you are good with Titanus Mosura, you can pack a punch there, but not exactly the best kaiju in the world, as it did get nerfed, but still a very solid kaiju. Next up here, one of our recent kaijus in 2023, Millennium. Now, before people start writing, let me explain. Millennium is very good. Its V ability, probably one of the best in the game. Kind of similar to RPOs, except it does have a 10-second cooldown. Basically giving you a damage and range buff Our Millennium's V paired with its second attack does grant you a giant AO, well, not giant, but a very sizable AOE. Its wall is kind of bugged, but once that gets fixed, it will make even Millennium even better than it already is. That wall would usually come up instantly, basically preventing any beam damage you might take. But it is very delayed, so you might have to just like preemptively use it before a kaiju beams. Millennium does have very nice range. Its beam paired with its V does inflict toxin and do more damage overall. Its health, very honestly very solid, roughly 3,000 base HP. Can't remember exactly the number, but Millennium very solid kaiju. Might be needing a bit of a nerf, but still very nice. Coming up next, we have Batra, or what some people refer to it as quote-unquote Tanktra, with its recent nerf. You can invest into HP points, and it'll be a lot more effective now. It did get an HP buff, but its melees beforehand were a lot. Well, they had a lot of active frames, being able to use your barrel roll, wait like almost the entire duration, and go in there, and then doing a combo with 3-2-1, doing roughly like 1,500 damage. Batra, now its melees did get quickened, but do not do not worry. Batra is still a very nice kaiju. Its melee DPS is actually a lot better now because its animations are faster, and it's very nimble as you can invest into speed. Personally, I use Batra a lot, and I'd probably recommend actually maybe 7 damage, because 7 damage does work very effective on Batra here, because you really Batra is all about getting those free hits, moving around and using your nimbleness and your actually quite high HP for a small flyer to your advantage. Batra, a very solid kaiju as we sort of near high A tier. Coming up next here, we have Biolante's superior, Volcanic Biolante. Although Volcanic Biolante does have less HP, it did get nerfed as it cannot jump and fling itself, basically giving it a dash. But although it is kind of stationary, it does have a 25 sprinting speed. Its beam is very nice and has a low cooldown, doing roughly 1,300, 1,400 damage. Its melee DPS is insane, doing 700, 600 damage with both melees respectively. Its HP quite similar to Bio, so you do have a lot of HP, very high DPS, and a solid beam. Your only problem is that you are quite slow, but V Bio is very, very good, granting its spot at near high A tier. Next up, we're going to have Heisei Mothra. The thing about Heisei Mothra, even though it has been nerfed in the past, still very, very good. It basically beats every single land kaiju. Heisei Mothra, very good in terms of combat. Its first melee is still a full body hitbox, so you can use that to your advantage. It does have relatively low HP, and it is very easy to hit as its wings are pretty large and they don't move as erratic as Titanus Mosura's do, which is what causes Titanus Mosura to still be quite hard to hit. But Heisei Mosura, I mean, sorry, not Mosura, well, you can call it that, but Heisei Mothra, its beam is very nice. If you have enough range, you can use the land beam, but if you do get in a beam clash, be warned that you'll roughly only be doing 60 because 60 damage in that beam clash, 60 per tick, because it does beam clashes only take in effect one head, well, one beam. For example, for a Ghidorah, it'll only take in one beam tick. Heisei Mothra, a very well-rounded full body hitbox in that first melee, and don't even get me started on the second and third attacks. You can use those to range land kaijus all day. Basically, Heisei Mothra shouldn't lose to any land kaiju unless it does get grounded for something. For example, like Muto Prime's fourth ability, Thermo's Pulse, Burning's Pulse, Heisei's Pulse, or G19 Stomp. Heisei Mothra, very nice kaiju. Coming up next, and another instance of falling from grace here, the USS Argo. Now, the USS Argo used to be the best kaiju in the game by a long stretch, even with that 3750 base HP. But with that nerf, thank God, credit Blair. Blair did nerf the Argo, and it's a blessing to everyone who wanted the Argo to get nerfed. Argo got a HP nerf by roughly 750. Its melee also got nerfed by roughly 120, 130 damage, and it doesn't last as long, so you can wait out that melee. It also did get a speed nerf, so it's not as fast, but that afterburner attack does give it speed, so you can make up for that and invest into speed, as HP doesn't exactly do too much for the Argo there, as its max HP is not too much. I think roughly 4,000 max HP. The Pulse, not too great, 540 damage, but it is somewhat spammable. I think like a 10-second cooldown, 540 damage with a very nice range. The missiles are very nice. You basically, well, it really depends. For a land kaiju, if they have beam spam or they have a lot of grounding attacks, such as Churno's missiles, because Churno can use missiles a lot, and the parry. The Argo, if it gets grounded, it dies. If it gets grounded, as well, if then again the grounding depends on how long the grounding lasts, but since it's very fragile, 3,000 base HP. Argo does get our first entry here at top of A, well, near top A. Next up here, we're going to have Shin Form 4. If I can find it, here we go. Shin Form 4 with that over buff. I mean, I definitely did need a buff as it was basically an XP bag. But those back beams are crazy. One tick, insane horizontal and vertical range of 1,080 damage. Its V move, definitely one of the best in the game. With regen points, it does scale higher with the initial first giant tick of HP that you gain back. And then it gains roughly a 70 extra, pairing with its regen. Very, very nice. Shin Form 4, definitely probably the Kaiju with the most regen in the game here. Shin Form 4, it's a thermal flame. You have to use it preemptively before using your beam, but its beam in total does like roughly 2,500 damage. A very nice combo of leading with your bite, then tail whip, bite again, and then back beams, and then repeat. If a kaiju does try to back off from you, but you don't want to use your main beam, the tail beam is a very nice option of 800 damage. And it does have a very nice range. You just kind of got to angle yourself to make sure it does land on the other kaiju. Very solid kaiju. Coming up next here, we have G19. Now, G19 probably the most important, most important update for KU, as it got KU to like 40,000 concurrent players. G19 definitely stands its own as one of the best models in the game, but let's go on to the actual tier list. G19, it did get a buff, and it also is getting a rebalance here, so this might be outdated, but don't worry, I'll be making more tier lists whenever rebalance waves do come out. But G19, it's Stomp, very nice range, it can ground kaijus very easily. There's a very nice combo that Jason taught me, the Monsterverse man himself, that if you're fighting a land kaiju, just stomp before you beam. So if they do try to punish you when you're beaming with melees, they'll get grounded by the stomp, and then they'll be able to use your high melee DPS. The third attack is okay. It has roughly 660 max damage in 3 ticks, but you can charge with it because it does have an extendo and then lead with your tail whip, as your tail whip does not have nice active frames. G19 roughly has, I think, 4,800 base HP. 4,600. Yeah, 4,670. Sorry. Yeah, got it now. 4,670 base HP. Roughly 5,890 max HP, and that heal too. So if someone does beam you and your beam is on cooldown, you can so usually what you want to start off with a fight, if someone does start off while beaming you, you want to heal and then answer back with your beam. Your heal does roughly heals you of 1,200 HP, making G19 a very nice kaiju, especially with that radiation buffing your melees. Next up here, we have Jet Jaguar Beta. Jet Jaguar Beta, very solid kaiju, probably in need of a nerf, definitely needs a nerf. Very fast kaiju, definitely not as fast as it was before, but it's a very fast kaiju. Its melees are basically, JJB's whole thing is ranging with your melees. The fourth attack and the first attack are very nice to range with and give you complete 100% control of your mobility. The second attack is a lunge in. Usually you want to try and, if the kaiju has a tail whip, try to bait that out before using it, because then you're open to getting hit by that tail whip. First and fourth melees do grant you the highest DPS you can by just spamming 1 and 4. The V move is very good, getting you more damage, more charge regen, and more HP regen. Can be gained by meleeing, of course. And even after you use it, has a 0-second cooldown, so you can just pop it instantly. So, yeah, JJB definitely gets its spot here at top of, well, not top of A, but near high A. Next up here, we have Heisei Godzilla. Heisei Godzilla, very well-rounded kaiju here. Getting at that rage bar you can trigger while meleeing, getting all those status effects. Well, not status effects, but it does get a very high damage buff, also buffing your beam and your pulse. Heisei Godzilla's beam is very spammable, doing a base of 800 or 900 damage, but as you build up rage, can do roughly 1,200 or even 1,300 or 1,400 with the stationary. Stationary, not very recommended unless you're fighting a slow kaiju, then you can use your tail to do roughly 724 damage with max damage plus the rage buff. But you're honestly better off not using the stationary mode, because stationary, the claw attack doesn't exactly have the most active frame, so someone can just bait out the claw attack and probably just double hit you by the time you do your tail whip. Heisei Godzilla, very nice kaiju, roughly, I think, 44, 43, 4400 base HP. Very nice and honestly very solid kaiju. Grants a spot here at near high, near top of A tier. Next up here, we're gonna have Turkey Rodan. Turkey Rodan, very nice kaiju. Its first melee is probably your best melee, as it is almost a full body hitbox. Its second melee, Judgment, I think it's called Judgment Peck or whatever, but not exactly the best, as it does have a wind up. But they did buff its hitbox. Turkey Rodan's melees aren't exactly the most high damage dealing melees in the world, with 400 and 400 and 450 respectively. Its beam is what makes it very good. That spirit bar does buff your beam by, I think, with 100, roughly 20%, dealing, I think, maybe 1500 or 1700 max damage with that beam. Not to mention, it is fairly quick. Well, that credit it to being a Rodan, and it does have very high base HP, roughly 3000, 3500, something like that. Heisei Rodan, very solid kaiju to use. Definitely would recommend. Next up here, we have our burnt Godzilla, Thermo Godzilla. Sorry, I almost said burning. We'll come up with that later. Thermo Godzilla, very nice kaiju. The only downside of it is that it over relies on its pulse. Melee range isn't exactly the best. The stomp did get a range buff a couple months back. The stomp is very nice, dealing roughly 800 damage. You actually can use a very weird build here with Thermo. You can use 7 damage and still do very high damage because of that meltdown bar. But be careful not to get it too high, or you may lock yourself. But that's what the V move does. Decreases your meltdown to make sure you don't lock yourself. The pulse can do roughly 2400 damage, but even with 7 damage can do like still 2200 because of that high meltdown. Melees, if you want the most DPS, you want to use the first attack, the claw swipe, and then the bite, because those gives you full mobility. But the stomp, if someone does want to, like, for example, if a Kong shadow dives you, or someone like tries to lunge at you, can use the stomp. If they do try to like have a ranging ability, the stomp is very nice. And then of course the pulse, but try not to get that baited out, or if you do get it baited out, then you're not exactly looking the best shape to win that fight. But Thermo, very solid kaiju, does rely on the pulse, high health, roughly 5300 base HP and 6700 max. Very good kaiju. Next up here, we're going to have Vudon and Juju. Vudon, it's basically these two, what do we call it, event special Rodans. Vudon having a very nice beam, doing roughly 1500 with max damage, but it does have a very long startup and very punishable, so you want to use that away. But it basically does beat every single land kaiju. Both its melees are full body, but you do have very low base HP of roughly 2800, but you are very fast. You can use your parry, but keep in mind, if someone notices that you're doing it, it's basically going to be just a waste of time, and allow that land kaiju or other kaiju to just regen and wait, because that attack does have a very long startup before it can be triggered. Might be needing a buff on that parry and then nerfing some other things, because those full body hitboxes on those melees are crazy. Might as well just spam the first one, because the second one just sends you flying. You have no control over it. But the potions are also very nice. The HP regen potions and the damage potion. Speed potion, not really too effective. Doesn't really do much for you. But Vudon, yeah, just really nice kaiju. Nearing top of A tier. Next up here, we have a very underrated kaiju. Definitely one of my most favorite to use in KU. You might even see me playing it from time to time. Titanus Behemoth. Now the very special thing about Titanus Behemoth is that it does have the best heal in the world. Its heal does heal 35% of whatever your max health is. So for example, if you have 6600 max HP, it will regen to roughly 2300 max 2300 HP. You actually can kill I've managed to kill a couple public server destroyers. Now obviously the more skilled the player is, the harder to kill them, but don't take fighting people in public servers as how strong a kaiju may be. It really just depends on how good the player is. But Titanus Behemoth has very nice active frames on that first melee. The second melee doesn't exactly have too many active frames, but it is a lunge forward, doing roughly 660 max damage. Pairing that with the stomp, doing roughly 900, but doesn't exactly have the most range in the world. You're better off using that whenever someone charges at you, because that 900 damage is very deadly. Not to mention, well, here I use a very weird build. Well, not exactly very weird, but with that well, back many months ago, Vera did nerf the damage stat, so using less damage isn't exactly a bad thing. It's very close to, so for example, 8 and 9 damage is very close to what max damage would be. So what I would recommend using for Titania's Behemoth here, I might talk about it a bit more than most Kaijus because I'm really a big fan of Titania's Behemoth here. But Titania's Behemoth, I use 8 damage, 7 HP, and then 5 regen. Very, very nice Kaiju. 7 health does give you roughly 6,500 health. So then with that 35% heal, you will do roughly 2,200. I mean, sorry, it will roughly heal you 2,200 HP. Basically, and it does have a 40-second cooldown, but if you can use that 2 times in a fight, that's basically like having roughly 10 or 11,000 HP. Titus maybe, not to mention, has very high DPS and can actually compete with G21. Anyways, coming in ahead of Titanus Behemoth, we're gonna have Kiryu. Now, the thing about Kiryu is that its beam chaining is very, very nice. I'm sure it might need a nerf. Well, it does need a nerf. That beam chaining is very nice. Roughly doing a 4.5k damage combo. The Mazer Beam, 2.1k, Absolute Zero Cannon, 2.3k. I might have those reversed, but either way, very high damage beams. Absolute Zero Cannon does take 700 health away from you, but you can use it to follow up with your Mazer Beam, and it's a very nice combo. The missiles are very solid, doing roughly 800 damage with that barrage. And its melee is very high damage dealing, but not exactly too much range in the world. You have to be up close, but then again, Kiryu is a ranger. You're not going to be really going up close with Kiryu, as that beam combo and those missiles, you got to use them to the most extent. Coming up next, a lot of people don't exactly like this Kaiju because of how cheesy it is, but Manda, thank God it's getting a nerf, but Manda is very nice. It's really high damage dealing melees here. It does have that EX form that does grant debility with its melees. It does get, I think, HP 1, or HP 2, giving it like 300 extra health. It does have very nice base HP of roughly 3,000. Very, very nice Kaiju. So yeah, I mean, Manda, not to mention, it is very nice in the water. Full body melees with the third and fourth ability, belly flop, and the sword. The sword is very nice, 750 damage, and you can turn and cheese people with your first and second melees, as Manda does have quite a small hurt box. So very nice Kaiju and nearing top of A tier. Next up here we have Burning. Burning Godzilla is a very, very solid Kaiju. Although Heisei might exactly be better in a 1v1 compared to Burning and Heisei, Burning is just better. It has better matchups because of its higher HP. The beam on Burning is actually worse, but really if you're a good Burning, you might want to start off the fight with a Meltdown beam and then instantly deactivate Meltdown, because Meltdown isn't exactly worth using at the moment. You do get damage buff, but the amount of HP you are drained from in Meltdown is just too overwhelming. The pulse is very nice range. 3 ticks of 500, 1,500 in total. Its melees, you can cheese people with the tail whip by turning around and then tail whip and then turning the other way, basically giving them a very small window to hit you and doing roughly 640 damage. The claw, not exactly great, just like Heisei's, not too many active frames, but because Burning does have a lot more, well, not a lot more, but very solid HP, does grant it here the 4th highest Kaiju here in A tier. Coming up next, we're going to have Kong 2021. Now, some people may not know how to use Kong 2021 because skill with Kong 2021 does make you very, very, very good. If you want to know how to use it, please do not ask me. I never use Kong 2021, but do head over to CultyBoy5's channel for a Kong 2021 guide. He is insane with Kong. He's the best Kong player I know. Kong 2021, that Shadow Dive ability, very nice and almost unpunishable unless you are G21. You have like a dual bash to charge in with, or a tail whip. Kong 2021, you're really better off using a speed, regen, and damage build, not really needing too much HP, as its base HP is pretty solid, 4,275. Its speed is very nice delays on its melees, can do a lot of combos with Kong. Kong just a very, very good Kaiju here, and grants it 3rd in A tier. Next up, for second place in A tier, we're going to have G21. Now, G21, I used to main G20. In fact, G21 was a very nice Kaiju. It is getting a rebalance, though. So, even with the rebalance, I'd still put it here. G21, very nice. It has delay on the mauling. But really, if you miss the first tick, you're probably only gonna not get. Well, if you land the first tick, you're really not gonna hit the second tick unless you're like literally right on the other kaiju. That's really exploitable for G21. Dual bash, roughly 600. Well, doing 690 damage. Very nice range, but it is not a full body anymore, as people used to cheese it with its full body and just basically tail flick people with dual bash. Its beam is very nice, doing roughly 1,700 damage with a 17-second cooldown, 5-second duration, but no end lag. So G21 is a very nice kaiju, very high HP as well, 5,122 base HP and roughly 6,000, almost 6,400 max HP. G21 being very nice here. Then second place in A tier, only behind Godzilla Ultima. Now Godzilla Ultima used to be in A tier, but it's kind of just, I mean S tier, sorry, but it's kind of just fallen behind the other new additions to Kaiju Universe and other kaijus that get buffs. Ultima is currently kind of glitched with the stomp. The stomp is kind of delayed and locks you in place. But even with the stomp being fixed, Ultima would still get its spot here. Mist Beam is very, very good and doesn't exactly have too much of a counter there. You either beam back and keep your range or take the damage, or even try and go in there unless you have very high HP and good DPS. Ultima, basically a powerhouse there with its melees. 1-3-1-2 is a very nice combo you can do. Vazda is not exactly a very good ability unless someone's trying to run away from you, but the range on that isn't exactly too crazy. The beam, 3,150 damage, but if you do not pair it with Mist, very punishable. Very high HP, the most HP of any land kaiju with 5,650 base and then 7,000 max HP. Ultima just getting itself a top A tier, and hopefully it'll get its stomp fixed. So maybe, just maybe, it'll be able to get back into S tier. Starting off with our first addition into S tier, Mechagodzilla 2021. Mechagodzilla 2021, despite releasing in like roughly mid 2021, I think maybe around this time actually, I think maybe June of Mechagodzilla 21. I don't remember exactly, but Mechagodzilla 2021, very hyped release. Wasn't exactly the best on launch, but with the buffs over the time KU has been around. MG21 has seen the light of day and now gets a respectable spot in S tier. You can combo the dash with the punch to do roughly 30% more damage, granting yourself roughly 960 damage in total if you use max damage. The stomp does 740 with a very nice vertical range and horizontal range. You can do a very nice combo with MG21 by using the stomp, then V, your dash, and then since you're dashing, just use your punch. So I'll roughly do 1,700 damage. That's why MG21 is known as being one of the best land kaijus, and actually can compete with flying kaijus with that missile and with that barrage doing roughly 700 damage. A very long range and full controllability. The beam does roughly 2,500 damage, maybe a 2-second startup and a bit of end lag, but still very good. You usually want to missile before you beam, so you roughly get 3,300 damage if you land every single tick and every single melee. MG21, 5,000 base HP, kind of similar to G21, but just with its mobility and that melee damage just grants MG21 at low S tier. Next up here, we have KU's most recent addition, Millennium Godzilla. Now on release, it was very, very bad, but now, well, it wasn't very bad, but it was kind of mid. I'd probably, on release, I'd maybe even put it like low A tier, probably behind Megalon or something. But Millennium did get a buff, and now probably an over buff is probably going to get nerfed right after, but it is very, very good. That G1 durability decreases 2.5 times as fast, so it'll last longer. There was a video I saw where two G21s would hollow core the Meyer Goji. It took like 1,000 or 800, 1,000 damage or even 800 damage if I'd have to rewatch the video. That G1 durability just grants it so much damage reduction, and since it lasts for such a long time, Meyer Goji is definitely not to be messed with. That V move does grant you no charge cost for your next range attack, such as the beam or the pulse, and a 2-time speed up. The beam, very nice, very quick, long startup, but it's a very quick beam. Does grant fire and a burning AoE around it, as well as very high ticks of 160 per tick. The pulse, very nice range, but it does leave it stationary once it uses it. 2 ticks of 750. Paired with fire, very, very solid. Meyer Goji deserves its spot here at low S tier. Next up here, we're gonna have Cleric. I'm not gonna rank base Cleric. We're just gonna let Cleric not be crippled here. That old blood, definitely either the second best or best P ability in the game. probably tied with Nutcrackers. Uh, Cleric is a very, very overpowered kaiju. It really does need to get nerfed. But Cleric's overall DPS is very, very nice. Uh, Pairing it with its spammable attacks, even well, I was gonna say in Old Blood, but I just forgot that it can just spam. So 12 charge cost in the first attack. You can use it up to 8 times, and then in the Old Blood, pairing it with fire. I know from my experience as a level 1000 Melex with 10,000 damage that Cleric in Old Blood will roughly do 1.2k damage to me per melee because of that fire adding on extra DPS. Cleric can extend the range on its second melee here with the jump, making Cleric actually have quite good range. And in Old Blood, you can use the beam up to 2 times Cleric. Also, pairing the V move with the melees just makes it extremely, extremely good. Cleric definitely gets a spot here at approaching mid S tier, but yeah, Cleric is very, very good and in needing of a desperate nerf here. Next up, we're gonna have Nutcracker. Nutcracker is very, very good. I mean, well, it kind of just over relies on that P move. While Cleric can be good without the Old Blood, Nutcracker not so much. It can range kaijus very easily with that first melee. Second melee isn't exactly useful. It does roughly 960 damage, but hopefully it'll get a buff to that second melee if it does get a rebalance. The third attack does have very nice delay, roughly 750 damage with the third attack. The fourth attack, roughly 1,650 damage. Very nice AoE, and then of course that last tick having an extended AoE. Nutcracker can use its P ability to basically gain all of its HP back. So yeah, Nutcracker just solid DPS, insane P ability. 4,155 base HP with a 5,200 max HP just makes Nutcracker a very, very strong kaiju, putting it in mid S tier. Coming up next, for the second best land kaiju in the game, Muto Prime. Now, Muto Prime, very broken. It's first, I love using Muto Prime. I'd hate that it's overpowered because then it's like, oh, I don't really want to use an overpowered kaiju, but I just love Muto Prime. Just really big fan of it. But Muto Prime has a very nice extendo on that first attack. Extendo is just a key word for extended hitbox. All of its melees do very nice damage. Personally, I will use a 9 damage build on Muto Prime with a 8 HP, 3 regen. You don't exactly need too much regen. Now pairing Muto Prime's already very high range with the infection just gives it even more range on the first attack. Infection, kind of just RNG based, but if you do, usually what I'll do is try to get at least infection 2. You can notice what infection they have based on your virulence bar. Once you get 100%. And then you get ticks down to 50%. That means they have infection 1. Once it ticks down to 25%, they'll have infection 2, and so on and so forth. They keep halving itself every time you grant them an extra level of infection. Its second attack has very, very high range. Its highest damage dealing melee. Its fourth attack, 3 ticks of varying damage, 400, 300, and I think 300 as well. 300 for the first ticks, and then it is the only the move that can ground flying kaijus with Muto Prime. Its Sonic Roar, not exactly too useful, but it's very useful on a slowing kaiju or someone that is approaching you. Well, charging at you, 1,500 damage, and a very nice knockback. Muto Prime, just an insane kaiju, very high base HP, very high max damage, HP, very high damage, just insane. Granting itself as the second best land kaiju in mid S tier. Coming up next year, we're going to have Eva 01. Eva 01, despite the nerfs here, is still very good. The gun mode does very high damage. If you can get a lot of bullets with that, just spam 1 and 4, 900 on both, 1,800 per 30 rounds. Just Eva is such a good kaiju. For 4 movesets, your best moveset is definitely going to be Spear and Berserk. Berserk does give you 900 and 800 damage melees respectively. You are limited to how much your ascension bar is. After you transform, you can lose ascension if you get meleeed, but you do have 90% damage reduction when transforming. Berserk mode does give you 25% passive for damage reduction, and Herald of the End is a solid move to end off with, not to mention the 400 heal it does have. But you are very vulnerable in Herald of the End. You probably want to use that when they're low because it is very fast, 1,700 damage. Knife mode, you do get 15% passive damage reduction, but you really just want to use that to get ammo. Knife mode, not really gonna use it whenever someone beams you. If someone beams you, just switch into Berserk mode for that 90% damage reduction and plus that 25% passive damage reduction once you're in Berserk mode. Spear mode did get a bit of end lag, but it's still overwhelmingly the best melee choice. Well, actually, no, Berserk is, but you can't use Berserk all the time like you can Spear mode. Spear mode is just knife mode, but better without the damage reduction. First melee, second melee, third melee, you can just range. Basically, Spear mode is basically something like Nutcracker with that ranging with the Spear mode. The Spear throw is a bit inconsistent, but it does 900 damage, and if you can land it, will ground opponents for 7.5 seconds. Evangelion definitely takes the spot as the best land kaiju in the entire game and grants us a high S tier. Coming up next, Monster Zero. Monster Zero, definitely my favorite kaiju to play as in KU, just because of how awesome the model is. I just really like the moveset. Unfortunately, it only has 2 melees. I probably would have replaced the Alpha Roar and put it as actually one of the roars and still granting the storm and maybe doing like another melee. But Monster Zero, despite the nerf of the Air Draconian Tempest, still very good. Air Draconian Tempest doesn't really have a huge hitbox, but if you do have skill with it, Monster Zero is a very, very nice kaiju to use in KU. It does grant itself as the 4th best kaiju in the game. If you are using a no speed build, your Alpha Roar will do 375 damage per tick, but you are very vulnerable when starting it up, so you might want to start flying away, or if you use it on land, it's very good. Monster Zero does not lose to a single land kaiju. For against land kaiju, you are going to want to use probably a max HP build, because if you do R-Roar, you will get 70% damage reduction if you are on the ground, but status effects do bypass the damage reduction frame, so you might want to keep that in mind. But that 6,450 max HP is very good for Monster Zero, not to mention that second attack, aka Draconian Tempest, does have very nice active frames that you can use while swooping down on someone, doing roughly 1,400, 1,500 damage in one fell swoop. As long as you do use those active frames on the second attack. Even on land, Monster Zero is very nice. So if you do get grounded, it's not exactly game over for you. The Draconian Tempest does roughly do 805 damage, and then the bite attack does 660. Then again, that is with max damage. Personally, I opt for 9 damage, 1 regen. 1 regen does actually do something, so keep that in mind. 9 damage, 1 regen, then roughly 4 HP, and then the rest in speed, because really a speed build for Monster Zero is better against fighting flying kaijus, but if you are going to go for land kaiju specifically, do use a high HP build at least. You don't exactly have to use damage reduction frames, because you do feel a bit clunky because that 80 flying speed, but yeah, Monster Zero is definitely the 4th best kaiju in the game. Coming up next, we're gonna have Manila X here. This is excluding level 1000, because I'm not gonna rank Manila X off of level 1000 because I'm literally the only one who has it. I'm gonna rank it off of basically a 900 to 950. Although you are very big, you do have 18 to 19 skill points. Your damage is very high. Your DPS is very solid. If you're level 990, 950, do not use speed. I mean, if you use speed, then you're not gonna have enough points to use into HP. Well, actually, it depends. You can use like roughly 3 or 4 speed points on Manila X at 900, 950 and still be a very viable kaiju with roughly maybe 5,600 HP, depending on how many points you use. When I was using Manila X, before I got level 1000, I would usually use 3 to 4 regen just to make sure I have enough regen to use my beam or melees. Manila X is a very solid kaiju, but just gets outclassed by the 2 next kaijus we have up. Now, my most hated kaiju in KU, T-Rodan. T-Rodan is absurd. Its projectile, well, we're going to base T-Rodan if you do have max heat riser. It's bar canned heat. Does have 4 stages, but once you do reach that 4th stage, you have your R-Roar will consume some of your canned heat, but it's very easy to build up canned heat because you can just melee. You get 1,200 damage with 4 ticks of 300. Your Vulcan Burst is actually better now because it sends you forward. 375 damage with max damage, plus that Fire 1 will basically give you 500 to 600 damage, depending on how much HP that other kaiju has. Those projectiles do roughly 1,100 damage if you land every single one. Those projectiles are very heavy dealing, not to mention T-Rodan's insane DPS. Well, not insane, but very nice combo of 1-2-1 if you go into melee someone. 3,300 base HP. And that first attack does have very nice active frames. T-Rodan, I mean, if you use it, I mean, you know how good it is. T-Rodan just definitely one of the best, well, second best kaiju in the game from my experience. Coming in at our number 1 kaiju in KU, Destroya. Despite all the nerfs, all the rebalances, Destroya is still easily the best Kaiju in the game with skill. Destroya does have very nice active frames on that first attack, aka variable slicer. Your tail whip is what you're going to want to use the majority whenever you're fighting a small flyer, as it is basically half of your body because that tail is so big. And it does have solid active frames, but it used to have like full animation active frames, which is crazy. It was basically unpunishable. Destroya, it's very hard. It's not exactly very hard to kill small flyers because your beam, because Destroya will kind of basically rely on its beam whenever it's fighting a small flying kaiju. But Destroya, make no mistake, 6,250 base HP. That's almost as much. Oh, that's actually the same max HP as MG21. Destroya, not to mention, it's very fast for being how big and how tanky it is. Destroy easily the best Kaiju in KU. Not to mention that Floral Beam is basically a free win button, even if you're low. 2,300 damage and basically only taking 1,250 of your health. As long as you have good aim, that you will win that damage trade most of the time. Destroya, just very good. 750 plus 675. 1,425 with both your melees combined. Not to mention the Oxygen Destroyer did get a bit of a nerf. Still does 2,100 damage. You just use that 1 melee to cancel regen, and then just go in for the Oxygen Destroyer. So yeah, guys, that's been my tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it here, I know it's been a very long video. I did this basically fresh off, so no cuts or anything. So excuse me if I may have to pause in between my kaijus here. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. Leave in the comments down below if you liked it, you didn't like it, what you may have done differently. I do plan on making more tier list videos if more rebalance update comes out. Now that I basically completed Kaiju Universe, but I will be on that soul grind once those souls are done, well, are fixed. So once again, guys, thank you so much.